Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're excited to have over 220 registered attendees for today's webinar, which is eligible for 1 credit from the ACI. Let's get started by giving one lucky attendee a Webinar Wednesday t-shirt for answering this trivia question. Today's sponsor, Asimily, is headquartered in California. Can you name the actor who was the only California governor to become United States president? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, I want to remind everyone that our first Expo of 2020 is fast approaching. Our ICE Imaging Expo takes place at the Hilton Scottsdale Resort in Scottsdale, Arizona from February the 9th to the 11th, which will bring imaging service professionals from across the nation for 3 days of learning, networking, and the latest advances in imaging. Registration is now open and you can register for free by using the VIP pass in the webinar workbook, which you'll find in the handout section of your dashboard. More details can be found at attendice.com. Also, a reminder to save the date for our spring MD Expo, which will be taking place at the Hotel Irvine in California from April the 20th to the 22nd. More details can be found at mdexposhow.com. And again, the registration is open. Okay, and let's see who the winner of our Webinar Wednesday t-shirt is. And it is Alex Eby. Congratulations, Alex. Of course, the correct answer is Ronald Reagan. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Asimily. Asimily is a team with backgrounds in healthcare, security, machine learning, and analytics. Asimily currently provides a medical device asset and cybersecurity management platform and helps providers understand all aspects of their inventory, discovers device relationships, does risk monitoring and mitigation, and finally provides an ability to prioritize patching and mitigation, providing alternatives to patching where available. For more information, visit asimily.com. Our presenter today is Shankar Somasundaram, CEO at Asimily. Shankar, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Linda. This is Shankar here from Asimily. And today, like Linda mentioned, I'm going to talk about the steps to build an effective medical device cybersecurity program. So a little bit about Asimily. Linda already mentioned a few things, but we're a 3-year-old venture-backed company. We are focused exclusively on healthcare. We are working with a variety of health systems across the country. We are venture-backed, backgrounds in healthcare, cybersecurity, networking, analytics, people from a variety of different companies. And we also have people from health systems working with us. And we have an advisory team, which comprises of people like Steve Grimes, Axel, ex-CEOs of Symantec, Blue Coat, and others. And we solve for a number of use cases, which I won't go into today. Today, the focus is on the program itself, and we have a number of integrations. So that's just a minute about Asimily. So let's go into the topic itself. So we have been working with different health systems, and so we see a number of challenges that health systems face at every level. So the first one is really around asset management itself. All of you in the call, I'm sure, are aware of this problem. Which is finding all the inventory attributes for the devices. And the challenge is the inventory attributes for medical and IT systems vary. And this can lead to a lot of problems in overall asset maintenance and management processes across the entire organization. From a governance, risk, and compliance framework, they vary too across between medical and IT systems. And the way to manage these risks for medical devices is significantly different. Especially because you already had Windows XP. Most organizations have Windows XP. And then Windows 7 just went end of support life yesterday. So now you have a lot of legacy devices which have to be managed differently than the way traditionally IT would have managed these devices on their side. There is a lack of baseline configuration standards, and there's lack of documentation itself on what kind of security exceptions can be done. And that all leads to a lot of challenges around risk, especially related to medical devices. There's a lot of non-compliance issues as well, especially now you have legacy devices. It's not always possible to be compliant with all the policies that are maintained in the organization. And you might have other policies on how to use and maintain these devices. Those might be hard to track as well. And in general, from a vendor management perspective, there is no centralized account management on how to give access to these vendors, how do you provision inbound and outbound access. It's mostly written in contracts that what is a vendor allowed and not allowed to do, but it's really hard to monitor, and almost no organization today monitors what their vendors are doing with their devices. So all of this makes the problem of medical device security and medical device lifecycle management fairly challenging. So having worked with different health systems, so now what I'm going to say over the next few slides is not just what Asimily is thinking. These are things that we have seen other health systems following, and some of these are inputs from some of our partner health systems as well. So really, to set up a medical device security program, we have broken it down here into 7 steps. And 7 looks like a lot, but it's really simple steps to follow to reach your goals. And I've listed it here. The first step is really to set up your objectives, what you really want to achieve from your program. The second one is to map out your objectives. What exactly do you want within each of those steps? What do you want to achieve? Step 3 is to plan out every objective, what is needed within that objective. Step 4 is to list other requirements you need from the program. What else do you want to achieve? Because sometimes health systems complain or they mention that it's very hard for them to get a budget for some of this. And so sometimes they justify their program by other requirements that they can then say that adds value, and then makes the entire process much easier. And then step 5 is to really identify the program metrics you would track as you implement your program. Step 6 is to have a process to identify your internal resources, if you're going to do all of this internally, or vendors, whether it's a solution or whether it's a service vendor. And then step 7 is to create an internal roadmap on how you're going to achieve that. So let's start going through each of them. Step 1 is to set up your objectives. Now, different organizations can set up their objectives differently. Now, what we have done here is we have just taken the NIST framework, which is generally the mother of all frameworks, and we have just mapped out some of the common objectives we see across health organizations. Now, this is not end all be all, and there could be others, but we have just tried to map out across organizations what are some of the things that people are looking at from a objective perspective for their medical device security. So on the left, we have listed the 4 aspects of the program. So to identify the devices, to detect problems, protect and respond. And identify is really getting an inventory. That is the first objective. Detect is really around vulnerability management, scoring and risk assessment. And we'll talk about this piece. This becomes a very critical piece. And then the other piece is around intrusion detection, baselining, profiling, that kind of stuff. Protection is really around how do you want to see the problem, how do you block it, how do you segment, micro-segment. And respond is really gathering more information so you can identify the root cause. So this is what many of the health systems have set up as their objectives. This is what they're planning to do as part of the first step of what objectives they're going to achieve. Step 2 is to really mapping out those objectives in a little more granularity. So when people say inventory, what exactly are you looking at in terms of inventory? What parameters are you looking to collect? Are you looking to just collect some network IP parameters because you already have the IPs and MACs for your medical devices in your CMMS and you can just correlate it? Are you looking at a lot more information because your inventory is not complete? Are you also looking to add the cybersecurity capabilities, which is highly valuable if you want to get it? What exactly are you looking to get, and what kind of network information are you looking to get? All of that is part of identifying what you want from the system. The vulnerability management, scoring and risk assessment is what is it that you want? Do you just want to identify the vulnerability? Is that what you want? Or do you want to focus, or do you want the solution, or do you want the program to give you the vulnerabilities that pose a threat, that are the highest risk, and a way to mitigate them? So what exactly do you want from this? From a vulnerability management, scoring and risk assessment is what is listed here. Intrusion detection is what are you planning to do with it? You want a baseline, you want to highlight when the device is not behaving as expected. What kind of alerts do you want? When do you want those alerts? So all of that is mapping out your objectives from an intrusion detection perspective. Containment and microsegmentation is obviously what do you want to do in that? Do you just want to block? Do you want to segment? Do you want to microsegment? Do you want to quarantine? Do you just want an alert that you can take an action offline? What is it that you want here? And forensic analysis is to really, so that you can identify and work on the most critical elements. What do you want from this forensic analysis? Do you want to know the root cause of the problem? You want to know what was the device doing, where it was doing, when it was doing, all of this to highlight where the problem was. And so once you have laid out your objectives in this fashion, and what I have listed here is broadly what most of the health systems we talk to want out of their different pieces in their objectives, right? But once you have laid out your objectives here, then you can start going into each of them and start saying what exactly you want in each of these different elements. So let's do that. So now we're going to take each of these elements that were listed out in step 2 and then talk in more detail about what different pieces entail. And this is again based on our experience. And if you might have additional parameters, feel free to let me know and I can add it next time I talk to it. So in planning of every objective, the first step is obviously the inventory management. Like I said, this is a fairly well-known piece as a problem. Everyone talks about it. And so we have split it into 4 different pieces that health systems generally ask for. The first one is, of course, all the IT and software parameters, all the IP MAC, port, protocol, services, operating system, all of that. Medical device parameters might be make, model, manufacturer, serial number, firmware version, all of that. Cybersecurity capabilities. Does the device does the device log information? Does it have anti-malware? Does it do certificates? Does it do point-to-point encryption? So different kinds of capabilities about the device that you want to know. And as much as possible, you want to know what the device is doing currently. And device topology is really how the device is connected, how the data is flowing. And this becomes very critical because people forget sometimes that healthcare is a very unique vertical in the sense that it's not just a single system with a single device. It's actually a system of systems. So no device lives in isolation. You got to know how the device is connected, how the data is flowing, where is it flowing. You have to know impact on one device. How does it actually flow down and have an impact on other devices? All of this matters. So device topology becomes as critical as some of the basic parameters about the device, whether it's the IT parameters or the medical device parameters or the cybersecurity capabilities. So once you have set out that these are the different elements you need, then you have to obviously justify it. And why this becomes important, obviously from an inventory, I don't have to explain because it bridges the gap between different asset management systems, what generally IT might be using and what the clinical engineering team or the HTM team might be using. So everyone talks the same language. Obviously, you can track the ability. It enhances your ability to track all these devices, to track missing or lost devices, which can also be part of the inventory, to track devices on the network, to figure out which devices are PHI. All of those can be part of your inventory. But having that information allows you to track all of that reliably. And then the information can directly be fed into your configuration management systems. Now, what you need to get there, obviously, is a way to gather all the inventory parameters. That's a no-brainer. Everyone gets that. But the second point is what I want to talk a minute about as well, is as critical as every other point I mentioned. Now, obviously, more and more health systems are deploying solutions to get information out of the network, which they can directly feed into their CMMS. But very few health systems have really a plan or a process in place to take care of any missing inventory information that needs to be looked at manually. And what I mean by this is because of the way medical devices work, almost everything you do, whether you do it through a solution or whether you do it manually, has to be non-disruptive. So that means if it's a solution, you have to be passive. You cannot go and scan the device. If it is a process, you have to have a way to gather it in a way that doesn't disrupt patient operations. And when you do something passively, for example, you are always going to find there are some missing information. Like you might not have some serial numbers that allows you to correlate with what's in your CMMS. Or you might not have some information that allows you to correlate with what's there in your CMMS. And your CMMS might only have serial numbers of the devices. So where the serial numbers are there for the devices, and in a lot of cases you would see that, then you can correlate. But what about that subset of devices where your solution only provides things like all the network parameters, maybe the firmware version, but some serial numbers are missing? What are you going to do about that? Because passively, there are limitations in what you can do. And so how do you get that information? What process are you going to follow? And the good news is that is also evolving. There are offline techniques to do it. And there are offline ways to actually make it simpler and easier to do than just someone going and entering the information and making mistakes. But you have to have discussed it, have to have thought about it, and just not assume that everything will be done to the final T automatically. That little piece at the end is not thought through very carefully by most health systems, and that also has to be incorporated in the overall thinking, in the overall process. So that's really on the inventory management piece. The next one is on the next step, obviously, is to detect through vulnerability management and intrusion detection. And so I split out vulnerability management, intrusion detection here as two separate elements, because people sometimes talk about it as one element. They say, oh, it's risk, and we want to know, anomalies, and we want to know vulnerabilities. But they're significantly different, because anomaly is different in the sense that it's reactive. When the device is misbehaving in your network, when it's doing something different, when it's dialing out to an IP, when it's doing something that is undesired, that's an anomaly. It's already happening in your network. A vulnerability is something that the device inherently has. Let's say you have an old operating system, or let's say you have an unpatched operating system. Almost every device has that. Then you have a vulnerability that is potentially exploitable, or that can potentially be used by an attacker in the future. So two different things, two different ways to think about it. And so when you look at this, you obviously want to know the vulnerabilities, you want to know the anomalies, but at the same time, you do want to know the potential of impact of that vulnerability. And that's important, because unlike the world of IT, in the world of medical devices, not all vulnerabilities are equal, not all devices are the same. And you want to know which devices, which vulnerabilities on which device potentially have a higher impact. And then you want to know what kind of security capabilities potentially exist either on the device or on the network that could mitigate the risk posed by that vulnerability. Because you're not going to be able to patch most of your vulnerabilities, especially in the world of healthcare. So you need to know which of those vulnerabilities potentially are already mitigated by compensating controls in the network. And when you don't have that, you want to actually have actionable recommendations, both for your vulnerabilities as well for your anomalies. So that's what you want to know. So this is not just a simple baseline profile, and then I will segment out my network. That obviously you can do as part of anomaly. This is going in a little more deeper and a little more thoughtful in that, because as new vulnerabilities come up, you got to actually think about how you're going to reduce the risk in your environment. And obviously, this is important because you want to prioritize the critical set of devices and vulnerabilities in your environment. I'll talk about this. Why is this important again as one unit? Like I said, Windows 7 went end of life. Windows XP is already end of life. We have also seen Windows NT, Windows CE, Windows 2000. So you see all these varieties of operating systems. So understanding which vulnerabilities are critical, which vulnerabilities are exploitable. Just knowing the vulnerabilities is not important. Which vulnerabilities are critical, which vulnerabilities are exploitable. Among the vulnerabilities which are exploitable, which ones potentially can have an impact in your environment, and from an impact perspective, which ones potentially are mitigated by already compensating controls that exist on the device or on your network, and then having ways to mitigate these vulnerabilities without doing a patch is very important. And one option obviously is to patch. So if you cannot patch, is to segment them out. But the challenge is we have seen health systems where there are a lot of segments, but over time, the segmentation itself has not been maintained. So devices now are spread across all their segments. And so segmentation itself is a challenge to maintain. So when you can segment it out, it can be challenging. So you need to have ways and workarounds to mitigate these vulnerabilities. And what you need to get there is obviously a way to discover them, way to prioritize them, a way to understand which ones are at risk, workarounds to mitigate them when you cannot patch or when segmentation can be very challenging. And then obviously a process again, and I go back to the process. When you are going to do any of this, you need to have a process to work on the workaround. So you can have everything in place where the solution or a service vendor tells you, hey, out of your 100 XP devices, I have narrowed it down to these 20 high risk. And out of these 20 high-risk XP machines, these 10 are the ones where I have workarounds, and here you go do it, and these are your high impact. Now, somebody can get you to that point and even give you the solution to actually implement them. But then you need to have a process in place to get it done. And the process might involving the IT team as well, because it could be some enforcement on the network. It could be doing a workaround on the network or anything like that. It could involve other elements of the clinical engineering team. And so you need to have that process in place. You need to have a way to act on them. And again, sometimes people forget about it, but not having the process in place after having all the data can also be as disastrous as not having the data itself. So you obviously need the process in place. That becomes very important. And obviously, from an anomaly perspective, you need to discover anomalies when they happen on the network. And then again, you need to have a process on what is more critical for you. Is it an anomaly? Is it a vulnerability? What are you going to act on first? Because again, there are two different things. Anomaly is something that's happening on the network now. You might want to see, some of these anomalies, you might say, I'm not going to act on it because, this is how my network works, or I cannot do much about this anomaly. I'm just going to put some external controls. Whereas some vulnerabilities, you might prioritize the workarounds ASAP. So let's say there's a new BlueKeep vulnerability that came out, or there's a new RDP vulnerability that came out. That might become your high critical aspect to look at rather than the anomaly. So again, once you discover the anomaly, have a process in place to know which one is your priority. And if you're working with a good solution vendor or a service vendor, or if you have good internal resources, that prioritization can be done by the internal resource, by the vendor or the solution as well. So once you have that, then you can act on it and really take action on what is needed. So that's from the vulnerability management piece. So we'll go to the next one, step C, as a sub-element, which is really protection through segmentation, quarantine, blocking. Now, obviously, as part of this, there are different elements, and you can either block the device completely, which has a lot of repercussions. So generally never recommended to do on a medical device network to block a device itself. The optionality exists. You can quarantine a specific device or port. Now that's more feasible if you know certain ports or services are not being used. And I'll talk a little bit about it. You can segment the devices. Generally, you need the help of IT when you're starting segmentation, because IT controls a lot of segmentation. Or you can micro-segment specific services within the devices. Micro-segmentation adds a lot of value, definitely, but you got to do it very carefully, because you might have, when you start getting a lot of micro-segments, it can get, segments itself can be pretty hard to manage over time. Micro segments, while the option exists, can get even more challenging to maintain and manage over time. So all of these options exist when you're looking at blocking or protecting your network or enforcing some action. Now, why this is important is obviously having the ability allows you to take action on devices or respond to incidents and create an additional level of security, because ultimately action on the device can be challenging. So you can take actions on the network. And what do you need to get there? A solution to, of course, enforce these actions on the network, on the firewall or on the access control device. So you can either go to your Cisco switch or your Palo Alto appliance or your Extreme appliance, whatever it might be. And you might want to take an action right there. Or you can take it from from a user interface, either provided by a third-party solution or from some other vendor, and you can take action from there. That's a technical element. But as importantly is the process itself. On the process side, there are a lot of things here that really start to matter, especially now you're taking action. So if you go back a slide, if I start looking at the process, let's say you have a vulnerability or an anomaly or an action you got to take, and the solution recommends an action, or the service vendor recommends an action, or your internal resources, we got to take an action, we got to block this service or a port, right? What becomes very important is the process here, because the tools exist, but how are you going to implement it? So the first thing to know is it what I'm planning to do? Is it going to have an adverse effect in my environment? Is it going to hit the availability? Is it going to cause a side effect that I didn't intend? And to do that, it's important to know the characteristics of the device. So for example, if you're saying I'm going to quarantine a particular port, on the device. I'm going to block this port, or I'm going to block it from browsing externally. The first thing to understand is what is going to be the repercussion of blocking externally. Is that port something that's important, that's useful, that's something that's commonly used by devices? So that's something to understand. Now, just as a side note, like at Asimily, we have seen like so many devices now. As part of some of the new modules we're working on, we are gathering information across all the devices we are seeing. And what we are seeing is there are some device, like almost every device has some subset of services and ports that is commonly seen across health systems. But then there are ports and services that are randomly showing up in some health systems, maybe because of the configuration and topology. But those are things to be looked at because you might want to look at whether those have an impact. Those can be closed, those have to be maintained, and so on. But in any case, anytime you decide to take an action or a service or a port, you've got to have a process in place on is that going to have any side effects. Same with segmentation, right? You say, I'm going to segment this device out, but have you considered where this device talks to? Let's say you're saying, I'm going to put all my infusion pumps in one segment, all my blood glucose monitors in the other segment. And that's it. I'm going to completely isolate them. But do you know which servers we are talking to? Do you know what services they're going to use to talk to that server? Because if you think you know it and you block it, segment it that way, and it turns out that, let's say 50 of your infusion pumps or your glucose monitors or whatever it might be is talking to a different server. Now suddenly things don't work anymore because you've broken down that communication path in your network. So having that, it goes back to some of the information you gather from the topology, inventory, and so on. But you have to have a process in place that when an action is recommended, you're carefully evaluating these metrics on the repercussions on the device, on the side effects, or on the overall system that can be impacted. And that process has to be in place. That discussion has to happen before you take any action. And that's why it's as important as the technical elements itself. And having a good partner, whether it is a service partner or whether it's having the right set of people internally or having a solution vendor, if you have the right people as a partner, internal or external, service or solution, then they will effectively guide you in that thinking as well. So that will help. And then the last piece, just to move along here, is really understanding responding through forensic analysis. So this is something that normally doesn't really come up in a lot of discussions, but now people are starting to ask for it. Is you have an anomaly, you have a vulnerability, people jump on the anomaly, but the question is is that the problem or is the root cause exists somewhere else? So for example, let's say in one environment, we found a device from one manufacturer, not naming the manufacturer, talking to a country it shouldn't have been talking to. And this happens in a lot of places, of course. So the question that the health system had, it went all the way to the CISO and to their VP of clinical. But the CISO got really worried. The chief security officer got really worried. He wanted to know what kind of PHI was transferred, when it was transferred. So you got to know, you want to be able to dial back and see what was really happening. What did the device was communicating to this country it should not have been. But what did it do during the time? How much data did it transfer? When did it transfer? Does it look okay? Was there an issue? Because you want to know, is this something that you need to escalate even outside your organization? Maybe some PHI, protected health information, has got stolen. That's a big problem. Versus maybe it was just a misconfiguration for a little bit of time and nothing really happened. You just block it and move on. Completely different actions that you would take depending on what you understood the device was doing. And so this becomes very critical when you actually look back. Or in some cases, understanding the root cause. You have a device that seems to be misbehaving. Someone looks like it's scanning the device. Is it really a scan? Is it one of your vulnerability scanners that has just done it? Is it someone external trying to log into the device? Very important to understand, right? Because in each of them, you have a completely different course of action. If someone is just misconfigured a scanner, okay, don't do it again. Block it. Make sure it never happens again. Simple. Talk to the IT team. All done. Maybe an hour meeting is all done. If someone is scanning your device from external, big problem. You got to, maybe someone is trying to attack your network. Completely different set of actions. And then if you map it to what I said before, if someone has been scanning your device, what kind of data was taken? What kind of PHI was stolen? Again, if that leads to a different conclusion, completely different set of actions. So obviously knowing the root cause of the problem becomes very important, and that's what I've been saying, because you can then save the time and resources, or put the time and resources in making sure you're doing what's right. Last thing you want to know is after a year, what you thought was, okay, the device was dialing out to an external country. You thought, okay, block it. But a lot of data got stolen. You didn't know what was happening the week before. Then you're in trouble. Or you spend all the time and resources debugging a problem only to know this was not really much of a problem. So it really saves you on significant time and resources. But there is a side value to this as well. It allows you to understand how the vendors and other players are using and accessing your devices. So that's something you want to monitor as well. I'll give you an example. We have seen where the vendors are doing the right thing, I'm sure, in most cases. But sometimes what happens is we have seen an example where, a few examples where vendors are logging in, remotely accessing the device, and the health system knows the vendors are remotely accessing, but the time of the day and the amount of data they're transferring was probably not optimal, for lack of a better word, for the health system. So they're transferring a lot of data at peak time for many of their devices in the health system. I mean, you look at something like that, you say, I'm going to put so much load on my network, and my vendor is transferring so much data every day at peak time. Is this something I really want to? Or they're using a service that is not very secure. Is this something I want to? Now, some of them do use tunneling, so that's okay, but some of them don't. And so you want to be able to say, I want you to transfer data at non-peak hours. I want to have some restrictions how much data you transfer. So there are like additional value adds when you can track with high granularity what your vendors are doing. That goes back to the vendor management process itself. And obviously what you need to get there. So this is very hard to do with some manual intervention. You obviously need a way to get all this information, track it, allow you to look back, allow you to look forward, get all that information that you can track. So with those are the 4 elements, you want to know what are the requirements you need from the program. You want to highlight that. I've just listed a few here that we hear from health systems. Now you might have a longer list. We have seen all kinds of things listed. One aspect that's commonly asked for is asset utilization. People want to know, average utilization, detailed utilization, and in understanding how these devices are used. It helps a lot with downtime planning and maintenance strategy, because if you know when the device is used, how much the device was used, what is the general pattern of its usage, you can take some action. And then there are other elements you can do with it as well. For example, if you have an imaging device, you know what kind of scans it's doing. You can effectively have some understanding of how your imaging devices are used as well. So that's all part of the utilization. I've just pasted a couple of utilization graphs there. From a other aspect that people look for is what are the other elements that the solution can bring or it will bring in the future? Or is it custom made for healthcare, or is just one more vertical? And all of this matters because, let's say, for example, device tracking. Can you track the device so that you know approximately where it is in your network? Or can you set a policy? This is something that's come up new from some health systems we have seen, but they want to set policies. Like they want to set a policy when, let's say you want to set a policy, alert me when a technician plugs in a mobile into my ultrasound. That's a policy. Or alert me when, someone brings in a new XP device with an RDP port open, and only alert me when it is, let's say, an X-ray machine or an MR machine. I'm just making it up. But we have seen health systems start to think more carefully about what is it that they want from their environment, or alert me when the device dials out to this kind of external IP. Right now, that could be a policy saying, I am okay with all of these. I'm okay with Philips talking to Netherlands, but I'm not okay with my Philips device talking to China. I'm just making it up. But the point being, you get the point, right? Where what we are seeing is health systems are starting to think more carefully about some of these things. And this becomes important, trying to get ahead of the curve instead of waiting things to happen. And then from whether it's custom made for healthcare or whether it's just another vertical, add some value. And then going back to whether it's a service vendor or a solution, many health systems are looking for their vendors to adapt, because this is an evolving market. You might have a preferred service vendor who provides a lot of services to you guys, or you might have chosen a solution partner. But whichever way you go, you have a market that's continuously evolving. The problems are evolving, the problems can change. You need to have someone who can adapt to your goals, who can add in new capabilities, or you can add in new services that can effectively help you keep up with the evolving market. And that's the ongoing development I talk about. It could be a service, it could be a solution, whatever it might be. But you need a partner who evolves, adapts, who genuinely will be your partner in the journey, because just a solution might not solve it, because the market is also evolving. So now that you have done all the work, all the legwork in listing all the requirements, now you obviously want to identify key program metrics that you will use to define. Now, I've listed some examples below. I can give you more based on, like, we collect some of these metrics that people are tracking. So some of the things people track is inventory, for example. What percentage of accurate data is in the system monthly? Number of devices with EPHI monthly. Number of devices with MDS2s monthly. What kind of vulnerabilities are there in the system? Number of critical and high risk, number of critical and high risk mitigations. And then some people also track what percentage of the total vulnerabilities are high risk. What percentage of the total devices have been marked as one having an exploitable vulnerability. So there are a lot of metrics here. Utilization, device stability, percentage utilization. And there are other metrics people track, like MDS2s. What percentage of the devices in the system have an MDS2, a manufacturer specification, already entered, which ones do not. So there are quite a few metrics, and we see that varying a lot across health systems, but generally a common set, at least in some areas that we see, and I can give more offline. Then step 6 is to identify a process to identify, having a process, to identify a vendor. It could be a service vendor, it could be a solution vendor, or internal resources. Now, some health systems are also building their own team to do some of this. If you're doing a vendor, then obviously you want to do more research on, how many, how mature is the solution, or how mature is the service. Do they have a knowledge of healthcare, medical devices? How proactive are they? Pricing obviously becomes a key aspect. What is their long-term strategy becomes a key aspect. Are they going to stay focused? Are they going to build more for you in healthcare? Are they going to continue to evolve? All of this becomes important. Because like I said, this is not a snapshot in time. This is an evolving market. So is the solution going to continue to evolve? Is the vendor serious about doing more for healthcare? And then from the research perspective, obviously meeting your program objectives is the most important thing. What are your program objectives? Capabilities become important. I mean, all the capabilities that you want. Plus, do they have integrations, or are they willing to integrate? Both are useful, because not every system you might have an integration with already off the box, but if they're willing to integrate, that might work as well. And what kind of time? What is the data quality? What is the method of data collection? How easy was it to implement? Is it on-site? Is it cloud? All of those can also feed in. Now, again, these are some of the metrics and some of the elements that we have seen health systems do. There's obviously a longer list that many follow. Again, if you reach out offline, happy to put you in touch with people who can provide that. And finally, step 7, once you've done in all that, is to have a roadmap in place on how you're going to get there. And this is something, again, I see a lot of health systems forgetting. They say, okay, I've done through all this. I've even gone, picked a partner, whether it's a service or a solution. But then they forget that there is an entire process after that. You've just picked someone. You have set your objectives, you've done everything. Now you have to have a roadmap, how you're going to get there. You have to have a plan with clear roles and responsibilities defined on who's handling what, when is it going to get done. So for example, if you're going to pick a solution, something that we are more familiar with, you got to have timelines, clear roles and responsibilities for when are you going to deploy? How is this deployment going to happen? How long is the data gathering going to happen? And then you already have some metrics in place. So, you have to make sure that you're monitoring those metrics. I emphasized a little bit on the process side. So basically have the process in place so you can act on any metrics and then monitor progress and use the information to not only feed back to your next cycle, but as importantly, feed it back to your management for them to know that you're genuinely making progress, that you did get more information, you have more things to know about, you have more actionable information. And this is again something we see health systems forgetting, not having the process in place, not having the roadmap. not having a clear path on what they're going to do once they get it. So at least think through it, at least have a rough idea of what you want and how this is going to work out. That will really help. And again, some health systems have the resources now, some do not. So if you don't have the resources, pick a partner. And I cannot emphasize, pick a partner who will adapt and grow as your needs grow. Because your needs will grow, your needs will change. And they won't change after 3 or 5 years, they will change in the next year. And this market will evolve. So as a summary, to give us some time for Q&A, set up your objectives, understand what you want from each of them. That's the first critical step. You have to create processes. Even though Asimily by itself is a solution provider, I cannot emphasize the importance of processes more. It is important to have good processes, or some processes at least. So create those processes at least, or have a way of how you're going to do it. Have a roadmap and timelines for your own self that you can then demonstrate to your management. Real progress is being made. And so you might not, and the last point is you not have enough resources. So pick someone, whether it's a service or a solution, but pick someone who will adapt and who will grow as your needs grow. Because with every 6 months or every year, every 6 months, I would say, things are going to continue to evolve. So you want someone who can adapt as well. And that's what I had, giving us some time for Q&A, just in time for 15 minutes for Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Shankar. We have got quite a few questions actually, so we'll get started. The first question is, how does Asimily help the health system deal with devices running end-of-life operating systems?
Thank you. So that's a good question, and this is again become very pertinent, especially with Windows 7 also becoming end-of-life now, almost getting the same status as XP yesterday. And so Asimily, the way we work, I'll just summarize and I can provide more information offline, is, and this is even for people who are wondering what are they going to do with their Windows XP when they cannot patch, or Windows 7 when they cannot patch. So what Asimily does at least is we started with a different approach, and this is something that's come from my background looking at this since 2012. So what we said is, look, we cannot patch these devices, but is it important to worry about everything? And the answer is no. So at least what we do here at Asimily is we say we'll start with the vulnerabilities. We know there are vulnerabilities, so we'll discover them. But that's just step one. We will then do some analysis to see which of these vulnerabilities are potentially exploitable, or which of these vulnerabilities are potentially attackable by an attacker. We have some ways we do it, and some research we do, and some analysis we do off the device on the network to see which of those vulnerabilities are really exploitable by an attacker on the network. That's step two. And when you do that, what is interesting is you might have 100 XP machines or 100 Windows 7 machines. And you'll see that many of them, because of the way they are configured or because of the way they're connected, are not really exploitable, are not really attackable. So you really reduce that set. And then we do an analysis on, okay, let's say 40 out of 100 are exploitable. Which of those have really an impact in your environment? And that you can have to consider a number of factors, like you look at patient impact, data, business impact, you look at security capabilities of the device, look at how it's connected. And when you account for like some 8-9 different factors, you will find that maybe you have 40 devices which have high risk, high exploitable vulnerabilities, 40 XP devices. But now you have only maybe 20 of them that potentially have a serious impact in your environment. And then you say, for those 20, so you already narrowed it down to 20 from 100. But for those 20, what is the workaround? And you might segment it, patch it. Well, one of the last things we do, we provide workarounds. Because we started with looking at the ways attacker can attack the device. We say, if you do this particular action, let's say you block this service from going to this external IP, or you prevent this port from doing this on the network, and most times it's not critical for the device, not important for the device. Then if you take this kind of action, when you block the service code doing this, or block this port from doing this, then you can pretty much mitigate the risk posed by the vulnerability. And so that way you're not doing a patch, you're not doing an action, you have a clear reason why you're taking the action, and you have a clear reason how you're mitigating the risk. And when we do this, you'll find there's only a small percentage of legacy operating systems that you might really say it's a high risk, high impact. I don't have an alternative action, so I need to think about. So there's a clear methodology there that can help you mitigate the risk.
Okay, great. So how does Asimily help the health system see what the device vendors are doing with the devices at the health system?
So this is again goes back to the vendor management aspect that I briefly touched on. So one of the things at least Asimily does is we effectively track how we have mapped all the vendors into where they are accessing the device from. So we know when a vendor is accessing a device, but we track effectively how much data are they transferring, when are they transferring, how are they transferring, what service or what port are they using. And we provide that very clearly, and you can set alerts on it. So what really happens is, when your vendors are accessing the device, from where they're accessing, and all of that information. So you can track what they're doing, and you can effectively get those alerts as well. That helps you manage your vendors better, manage your device access better, and manage your network better as well.
Okay, so how do you help with misplaced devices?
Yeah, so for misplaced devices, one of the things we have seen is some people rely on their RTLS systems, but RTLS systems, real location systems, can be costly. So what, at least some of the things that we have done from an Asimily perspective, is we have effectively added the ability to see when was the device last seen, and if when the device was last seen on the network, then you can effectively track where exactly on the network it potentially was, down to the service of the port, down to the network appliance. And then what some health systems are giving us, they are giving us the location, the physical location of their access points, or their network appliance. So with that, now in the system, you can start to see, okay, this was the last, it was seen 1 month ago. 1 month ago, this was the last access point it was connected to. This access point is located on building 1, floor 2, and this is the nearest closet. That's where it might be. So you start to get a picture of where your devices potentially are sitting in your network before they disappeared. And of course, if that last access point is close to your door, then you got to still really start looking at the issue, because maybe somebody walked out of the building with that device. And then obviously with the ability to detect, with the ability to see what kind of protected health information it was transmitting or storing, then you can start taking remediation action. So this kind of tracking, where you can get it down to the nearest closet on nearest door, something that Asimily does today as well. But that's a way to track those devices as well.
Okay. What information must we document when performing an incoming inspection of a new device, for example, network information, MDS2?
It's a good question. So when you get a new device, now this is an area that we are doing a lot of work on, so I can talk about it for almost an hour, but try and summarize what I think should be done when a new device comes in. Everything I've spoken, it's a great question also, because everything I've spoken about, and a lot of people think about only devices in their environment, but they forget about new devices coming in, and those new devices also will add to the problem over time. So when a new device comes in, there are a number of things you need to do in what we are seeing. The first thing, you obviously want to gather all the parameters, and the parameters you want to gather is everything you would gather like it's on the network. So you want to gather, obviously, starting with what kind of MAC information, like all the network, the operating system it has, the MAC information, what kind of, ask the manufacturer, what kind of services and ports are they going to be keeping open on the network, document that. You want to obviously gather all the basic medical device parameters like serial number. You obviously will have the make, model, the firmware version of the device, at least when it was installed. You want to gather the cybersecurity capabilities. So MDS2 is useful, but one thing I would say is most people gather MDS2s, and please do gather MDS2s. But as importantly is to have a way that you are able to refer back to it, because people gather the MDS2 and it's sitting on someone's laptop or some server, and then people don't know where it went. And so they did the task, but they didn't really do anything with it. But do gather the MDS2, and within that, there are a lot of cybersecurity capabilities. Gather information on how you want, what is the optimal way to connect the device, what are the optimal port services that are there. Along, when it's a new device, do some risk assessment on the device when it's coming in, so you understand what is the potential risk of a device as well. And this, I would just emphasize for a minute on this point, because if you don't do the risk assessment and you plug it into your network, and then you go through everything I just mentioned, And then you find out that this is a high-risk device. Now you're going to run into problems because now, again, you just put, let's say, $500,000 on this high-end capital equipment. And now you're suddenly worrying about risk. Whereas I'll give you an example. A health system followed this process. They did a risk assessment very well on a high-end capital equipment. They found that it was risky to a certain degree. They had gathered all the other information. And then they obviously had other parameters like how useful is it from a clinical. They had done all the evaluation. One of their doctors was pushing for it. So that was obviously very important for them. But because they looked at all this information, the network, the medical device, the IT parameters, the cybersecurity capabilities, the risk parameters, what they also did is they added another $1,000 to their budget or $2,000 to the budget to put some kind of box in front of the device that effectively mitigated the risk as well. So what it does is, as you gathered all these parameters and did all the assessments, you might want to take remediation actions upfront, which is very interesting, rather than actually doing it after you enter the network. And that can effectively save you a lot of heartburn later. So in summary, I would say gather all the IT, medical device, the MDS2's parameters, but make sure you do the risk assessment and already look at what kind of way you're going to remediate it. And if required, budget it, because much easier to budget $1,000 or $2,000 upfront when you're making a $500,000 purchase or $250,000 purchase if it's high in capital, rather than to go and ask for it later. And then, of course, if you want to discuss more, happy to discuss the topic we have been looking at a lot recently.
Okay, that's great. So another question we've got is, our hospital uses two different CMMS for IT and biomed. How can we fill the gap as an asset from an asset management point of view?
That's a good question. So obviously I have more counter questions to understand exactly the situation. But this is something we have seen. Now there are different kind of scenarios at play here. Someone has an IT asset management and then someone has a CMMS system. So the thing is, the IT management generally track everything by IP and MAC. The CMMS systems generally track everything by serial numbers. So where it is the IP and MAC, so you want to make sure that the IT management system knows which ones are medical devices, first of all, because you don't want them to do an active scan, or you don't want them to crash one of your medical devices because it looks to them like an IT workstation. So if you have a good solution, or if you have a good service, then they will effectively automatically enter the information into your IT management systems and set a flag that these are medical devices. And similarly, for your asset management system where there are serial numbers, if you have a good solution and a good partner, they will help fill that information as well. They will have found serial numbers and they would correlate that information with the information already present in your CMMS. So effectively, your IT and CMMS asset management systems will end up having a common view of which ones are medical devices, which ones are IT. And you're from a clinical side, you might want to gather a lot more information about the medical device. IT might not care. But from the IoT devices, they might want to gather a lot more information. Clinical might not care. But again, I would go back to one of the points I mentioned. When you try to create this common view, because your CMMS system might only have serial numbers, as an example, and your solution, for example, might not have all the serial numbers because it's passive, you cannot scan the device, you might have some serial numbers which are missing, you have to have a process in place. And this goes back to my point, that pick a partner, I call them partners, who will find ways to work with you to bridge that gap over time and as it evolves. Because if you go and enter the missing gaps manually, you pick the serial numbers manually, it has a lot of challenges. So a good solution will bridge the gap by making sure common information is there in both. And then a good partner will help you find ways to get the last pieces of information in an easy and efficient manner.
Great. We've got time for about one more question. Is how do you suggest managing CMMS that reside in the cloud and need to be accessible to biomed 24/7, 365 days for proper medical device quality assurance testing?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah. How do you suggest managing CMMS that reside in the cloud and need to be accessible to a biomed 24/7, 365 for proper medical device quality assurance testing?
That's a good question. So this is an interesting one. I haven't actually come across this question as much from many health systems. But I would put it this way: having a vendor, having a CMMS in the cloud where you need 24/7 access is the same as having a vendor where you need like a vendor needing remote access. It's now vendor needing remote access internally. The way I look at it is, when you have anything that's external to your organization, whether it's a CMMS in the cloud or a vendor trying to access internally, having strict monitoring policies on who's accessing it. So access controls become very critical. Where are they accessing it from? So you don't want someone probably sitting in a garage and logging into your CMMS system and downloading data maybe. So having access controls on who can access, where they can access. Maybe you want policies on when they can access the data. Maybe a 3 a.m. access is highly suspicious. You have a 24/7 access, but you want certain alerts or a certain logging capability, so you know when people are accessing and certain kinds of alerts. Having those kind of access controls in place and having maybe some controls on what data can be transferred, what cannot, becomes a way to manage this. Because in some cases, the business need is that you need something that's remote, something in the cloud, something the vendor wants to manage it externally. And so having access controls in place and having a way to track those access controls, maybe through a policy, that's where the policy management comes in place. Like in Asimily, we set policies, allow you to set policies, but having the ability to set policies or have a way to track these accesses over time is then the right way to manage. So summary of it is, set the right controls, access controls, time controls, location controls. All of this can be done with a lot of identity-based systems today. It's all there. And then obviously track them with some policies or however you might do it. And then make sure those are getting enforced. And that way you will make sure that there is no risk introduced by this, and you're doing it in a safe manner to meet all your business needs.
Okay, that's great, Shankar. We're actually coming up to our hour. So if you have submitted a question, don't worry, I will be sending them to Shankar so he can answer them offline. So thank you again, Shankar, for a great and very informative webinar. And thank you to today's sponsor, Asimily. Just a quick reminder that the post-webinar survey and certificate process is automated. So the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive in about an hour's time. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately, and one lucky attendee will win an Amazon gift card. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. And for more information about all our upcoming webinars, please visit our website, webinarwednesday.live. So thank you once again for everybody joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.